Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, rumors are already swirling about the 2018 election. Who is considering a run? And can Democrats win back a seat in Congress? The Supreme Court hears a landmark case on gerrymandering. What might they decide? How will this impact the political landscape in Utah and across the country? Protests across the country are reigniting conversations about the power of free speech. Are policymakers listening? And how are we feeling the effects in Utah? The tragedy in Las Vegas once again opens the debate on gun control. Will Congress act? And what has the response been of state leaders? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I am Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Mara Carabello, president of the Exoro Group, Brian King, Democratic State Representative, and Matt Canham, senior managing editor of the Salt Lake Tribune. Glad to have you all with us tonight.
Thanks.
We haven't even got to the special election of 2017, and we're talking about 2018.
Why not?
I know, why not? That's what we do. But something interesting this week, Salt Lake County Mayor Ben McAdams has said, I might be interested in that 4th congressional district seat. Let's talk about why. Representative King, let's start with you. Why is he doing that now?
Well, as a practical matter, I mean, Ben's been a great Salt Lake County mayor, but as a practical matter, if you're going to get elected to a higher level office in Utah, Congressional District 4 is probably the best shot for Democrats.
Okay, so this is his best shot? That's why?
There's also, I think there's a couple of things. I think I've known Ben for a long time, and he is a very good politician. And I think if he says he's seriously considering it, it's because he's seen data that shows he's competitive.
That's what I was going to say. It's about the numbers for him. So he's already said 85, 84% of that district he already represents. He also has, you know, the inside baseball is telling us that he has done some preliminary, or groups have done some preliminary polling, showing him with a handful of points in it. So what Ben has to weigh, what the Democrats have to weigh, is the numbers seem to be viable in this race. Then you have to weigh, you're moving to D.C., Congress, do you want to move from local politics to national politics?
So he's doing the math. Is it really against Mia Love, or is it against someone else? What do you think that map is really going to look like at this point? The two of them together, and what do you make of the fact that Mia Love went on the offense almost immediately?
I thought that when you say she went on the offense immediately, the idea that Pelosi equals McAdams has been around for a long time. I remember Republicans saying the same thing about Jim Matheson and Pelosi. I don't know that plays very well, especially when the leader of your party and the President of the United States is Donald J. Trump. I think that you are susceptible to having that same equation made in a way that hurts you, doesn't help you.
If you just look at the calculus for Ben McAdams, his name has been brought up often for governor, which is also a race for next year. I think him saying he's seriously considering this is a step away from that race and step towards something that's probably more practical for a Democrat in the state of Utah. It also, if I'm correct, comes in the middle of his mayoral term. So if it doesn't work out, he still has a seat of power and he can try again down the road. I mean, he can use this as a fairly safe test case for a future candidacy if he wants to run again. A lot of times, people do more than one run before they win a seat. Mia Love is a perfect example of that. She lost to Jim Matheson before she won that race. So this could be a start of a couple attempts we see from Ben McAdams trying to get in this race.
I do think you're going to see Ben making this decision sooner than later, because the strategic money and the way that the gifting cycles work, it's going to behoove him to make this decision early.
That's interesting. One more point on this, Representative King. It's been a little while since we've had a Democrat take a congressional seat. Kind of handicap this for us. What do you think? Is this the best shot the Democrats have?
Of those 4 congressional seats that we have, I think CD4 is pretty universally acknowledged as the one that's more favorable for the Democrats than the other 3. So I think when you add that in, and you add the fact that, as Mara said, he already represents the great majority of CD4. So I think that he feels that this is comfortable territory. I think that, in fact, it is the most favorable and likely shot. I think, as Matt was alluding to in terms of running for governor or some other statewide office, that's another level higher and more difficult. I think CD4 is very achievable for a Democrat that's got great qualifications like Ben.
Okay. The boundaries that comprise these districts are interesting, and it's a subject of the United States Supreme Court this week. They have met to hear a case in Wisconsin on gerrymandering. Let's talk about that for a moment, because that decision is going to be big across the country, and really this is about whether or not you have this bias by the parties in the districts themselves. Mara, let's start with you. Is this going to have an impact on politics in Utah, this Supreme Court case?
You know, I mean, it's hard to see an immediate impact. What I like about the Supreme Court case is it gets to the heart of the matter, which is where are we off representationally with our districts. I mean, it has a unique set of circumstances in that state to test the policy issue, so I like that. In terms of the impact on Utah, I don't see it, but what I'm intrigued by is the combination of Count My Vote, even as it stands now or in its new iteration. And if you saw more impartial boundaries, I think this next go around, and you coupled it with a different way of getting to the ballot, that moderation, who I'd never want to forget in this discussion. We have political discussions, and in Utah we talk about the Republicans and the Democrats. We miss the 40-45%, depending on where you live in Utah, that are unaffiliated. And I'd like to have the conversation about what is gerrymandering, what does a moderated system do to help the unaffiliated, those independent voters who want to choose the person. So I can see a generational change. I can see this making a difference with the combination of Count My Vote or an indirect path to the primary.
What the Supreme Court's talking about is, can you draw districts based solely on a partisan benefit, right? And we know that's exactly how it happens now. You'll have certain lawmakers say, no, we didn't do it just because it benefited our party, but when you look at the maps, it's pretty clear. That is why these boundaries are drawn. And you look at the state of Utah in the state legislature, the number of safe seats is pretty astounding, both on the Democratic and Republican side. And then part of that's where people choose to live, but we don't have that many competitive races. I work for the Salt Lake Tribune. I would like more competitive races. Right. If I have a bias, it would be towards something where we have an interesting exchange of ideas. And so I'm in favor of a Ben McAdams Mia Love race just because it would be an interesting exchange of ideas. And if we had a change where there were more competitive districts, I think it would benefit politics in general.
Well, and who's missing out? I mean, you talk about how representation is chosen. And if representation is chosen based on politics instead of affiliations or advocacy or like-minded people, it makes it harder for the representative, right? I mean, the representative now has a disparate group. And so, as Matt's saying, you know, we know on face that there is absolutely an issue of the politic taking over in terms of good representation.
The gerrymandering angle, Jason, is worst at the congressional levels. That's where I know this because I was on our last redistricting commission in 2011. We, as Democrats, had a lot of input with our Republican colleagues when we were talking about redrawing of state Senate, school board, and House races. When it came to the congressional districts, the Democrats were shut out of the room, and the Republicans got talking points and information from their federal counterparts. That's where the really egregious redistricting happened. But it also happens to some degree on the state level, too. I don't think it's going to, if that case goes through, and Justice Kennedy, who is clearly the vote on the Supreme Court that's going to decide how this case goes, if he goes with people who want to allow for partisan consideration, political consideration in redistricting, if he does that, I don't think it's going to move Democrats into the majority in Utah or any other red state, bright red state like Utah is anytime soon. But it will have a marginal effect on a handful of races in the House or the Senate at the state level. And I think that's a very good thing. Plus, what we have right now is about 35% of Utahns vote for Democrats in our congressional races, and we have only about 17% of the seats in the House and the Senate at the state level held by Democrats. Why is that? In large part, gerrymanders.
You think it's because the lines are not drawn appropriately in the state now?
Yes. So the Associated Press did a study of this exact thing in every state. And in Utah, they did find that Democrats get more of a vote than they get seats in the legislature. But they also said if they estimated that if all the districts were drawn with a nonpartisan lens, Democrats in Utah would have gained 3 seats. Now, that would be something that Democrats would probably love, but would also be kind of marginal when it came to the big effect on state politics in Utah. Utah is such a conservative state that we're only talking 3 seats in the state legislature.
Every little bit helps.
He'll take those 3 is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's get to one of the efforts underway in the state to try to rectify this, or at least to put it in the hands of someone else, the Better Boundaries Initiative. is out right now in the field trying to get some signatures here. Mara, is this going to have an impact? Do people feel good about taking it sort of out of the hands just of the legislature, put into this independent group, which is what this initiative is about?
I mean, their polling is saying that they have strong consensus in this state. It's hard to talk about an initiative issue without talking about the demands on getting on the ballot. So it's a pretty high mark, as we all know. There's a distribution requirement and a total requirement. So for them, it's going to be maybe not so much about consensus, but of the voter, but their ability to reach and get the signatures and raise the money they need to get on the ballot. All the research I think any of us have seen are showing that there's some consensus in the public that having an independent commission it would be a good thing.
Will people trust that, Representative?
Well, here's the thing. Under the state constitution, you can't change the constitution without the consent and the vote of the legislature, 2/3 of each body in the legislature. Right now, power to redistrict is in the hands of the legislature. I don't see a constitutional change happening anytime soon. What this initiative will do is set up an independent body to make recommendations to the legislature. The question is, will the legislature promptly ignore them, or will they say, okay, I think personally that you're going to have a lot of legislators who, upon receiving a recommendation from an independent commission, will say, we don't really want to walk away from that or ignore it. So I think it will be a movement in the right direction, and I think it's more likely than not that the legislature will accept those recommendations as long as they are based on sound considerations and the kind of information that we want redistricting based on.
Okay.
I think when we've looked at polling of Utah voters, yes, they're conservative by and large, but they also don't look at themselves as 100% loyal to a party. And we've seen that with the Count My Vote stuff, with the idea that there should be an easier path to get on the primary ballot through signatures. Voters are in favor of that as well. The idea that they shouldn't be the ones making the choice, the party shouldn't be. And I think the Independent Redistricting Commission fits in that same rubric, is that, yeah, it should be more just, it should be a fair playing field. And I think if you're a conservative in the state of Utah, you have a high confidence level, fair playing field, or the current situation, the Republican Party is going to have the majority of the power in the state either way. So it's not like this is tilting the balance of power in the state of Utah.
Okay. Let's switch gears for a moment on an issue that is really being talked about in the country, but in the state of Utah, and that is the First Amendment, freedom of speech. I bring this up because we've been reading our own local papers. We had a conservative speaker that came to the University of Utah campus. There were protesters there. We have NFL players taking a knee. Let's talk about what this means for just a moment. Representative, we'll start with you on what kind of speech we're talking about here. Maybe give us a lens for the law and the difference between offensive speech and hate speech.
Sure. Well, fair disclosure, I'm a board member of the ACLU, proud of it, but that organization, and I personally care very much about this issue. This is an important issue, and sometimes we have less tolerance for objectionable or offensive speech than we should. We want to say, that really annoys me, or that's really hateful speech. But up until the point that you incite immediate unlawful action, we traditionally in the United States of America, rightly, have had a pretty high tolerance for speech, a diversity of speech, and that's one of the things that makes the country great, I think, historically. I think we ought to continue that. The question is, at what point do you reach that boundary? Where do you draw the line for speech that's not just offensive, but has the potential of immediately inciting unlawful action, violence or some other unlawful action? Those are tough lines to draw sometimes, but I like to think that we ought to err on the side of, if we have any doubts or questions, let's err on the side of making sure that people have an opportunity to air a wide variety of speech and thoughts.
Matt, you followed that story on the Ben Shapiro visit to the University of Utah. Kind of follow through with us what happened there and who did it right, maybe who did it wrong, but really from the perspective of the students as well.
Right, so Ben Shapiro is a conservative commentator that I had never heard of before this. He's not the biggest name in the world, but he says some things that some people feel is outrageous. And he is going around college campuses trying to incite the protests that exactly happened here. And those student groups had all the right in the world to protest, had reasons that were valid to protest. He also had reasons to say that, maybe people are overdoing it. What I love is I'm all about protests. I mean, that's a free speech, First Amendment guy. As a journalist, we think that's important. People should have the right to say what they want to say. And I think the University of Utah handled that situation perfectly. He wasn't canceled, it was not blocked. There were security measures in place. There were a couple instances where people had to get arrested because they were violent against someone else, but there was no overt action to stop people from protesting. Everyone, handled that situation the way it should. I'm a little concerned that we talk about that as something that is dangerous. That is the most American thing there is. Like, that is what this country is founded on.
Spoken like a true press guy.
And it was the separation issue, right? It's why we formed this country. I mean, it's the heart of it. And what's intriguing is as we go into this new era of attention seeking, right? We have a lot of people who have replaced public discussions with attention-seeking discussions. So I feel like one of the things that we need to remember about ourselves is that we can choose to unplug, and that one of the best ways to protest or exercise your right of free speech is to don't regard those who are saying things you don't believe. I think that's what the students did well. I mean, protests are a form of that, but also ignoring people. We're going to have to figure out how ignoring people in an era of free speech. And the other thing that we've done well in the United States is time, place, and manner. So we're going to discuss a couple rights today, perhaps, but in freedom speech, we never want to go down the road of infringing on people's rights to have their opinions. But there are times and places and manners, and those are where you protect other people, where you hold our society together. And I think Utah right now is doing that pretty well.
Other college campuses totally blew this.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been places where student groups and colleges have rejected speakers because of the content of what they say. On a college campus, to me, that is outrageous.
And to his credit, President Obama was very direct and explicit in calling that out and saying that's wrong. We ought to be not coddling these kids. When they go to college especially, they ought to be exposed to a wide variety of divergent viewpoints, even if it offends them, and even if it's not something they grew up with. This is something that they ought to have.
Well, how do we get that in their minds? Because some people would, even in this most recent episode on campus, the talk was, I don't like that kind of speech, so that speech shouldn't be allowed. All right? That's kind of seems to be what some would say.
The second does not follow from the first.
That's right.
Just because you don't like the speech or you even find it hateful doesn't mean that it should not be allowed. And that's what we need to develop thicker skins. We need to develop greater tolerance for diversity.
And I also think, though, that that's a chance to protest. That is American. If you don't like a speech, you should protest it. Now, what happened in Charlottesville earlier this year was tragic, but the idea that you had white nationalists gathering and there was a protest against it, that is the right reaction. It shouldn't turn violent. And that's where those place and time restrictions you were talking about could have been better used there. The University of Utah handled it right here in having a buffer zone around the building, allowing the people who are going to that speech to have easy access in and out, but to have wide spaces where protests could happen in close proximity so that people aren't shielded from the protest either. I also really don't like it when we've had these events, and this happens a lot at our national political conventions, where the protests are put miles away, where it's like, okay, we've given you this pen, that's where you can protest, but we're all going to be over here, so we don't have to see this messy person who disagrees with me. I don't like that either. We should confront the idea that there is a debate of ideas.
Right, it's interesting to remember the history of several Supreme Court decisions happened in Utah. I mean, as you recall, there were protesters at Temple Square. Salt Lake City was the one presenting at that time, I mean, not formally, to the Supreme Court, in which it was how does one protest and how does one allow access to, in this instance, exercising their religious freedoms. And that's where many of those lines have been drawn. There is room in our society. From day one, there has been room in our society for us to express different points of view and yet allow each other room to exist and flourish.
Thank you for those comments too. Let's talk about what's happened recently in Las Vegas. Our hearts go out to those people there, this terrible tragedy. And as you have talked about before, Mara, sometimes these events cause certain issues to come forward, which we have to talk about. And in this case, we're talking in the country about guns. And some things have been happening in our Congress, but even in our state. Let's talk about some of the efforts that have gone on from the NRA this past week. Let's start with you in response to this tragedy.
Sure. I mean, I think, first and foremost is to think of the people, and then we're going to move on to the politic of it. And the politic of it, I think that I'm growing intolerant of is event-driven legislation. So in my mind, there have been enough acts of mass violence and enough acts of one-on-one violence in the area of guns that it is ripe in time to have an overall policy discussion, and that I'm a little frustrated with just looking at singular solutions. And I think the NRA, who I believe is one of the best crafters of political strategy that we've seen in modern history, I think they're quick to put out a solution. I would tell you that as someone who watches the political world, I would be shy about a solution that an advocacy group puts out right away.
Is there a strategy there? Matt and Representative?
Yeah, sure. I think, the NRA would like to say, okay, these bump stocks needs to be outlawed, and then once we do
talk about what that is really quick.
Okay, the bump stock is the mechanism that was utilized, they found on many of the guns that this guy had down in Vegas, that allows you to convert a semi-automatic weapon, which means you have to push the trigger for every bullet that's fired. You can do it quickly, but still not as quickly as if you use a mechanism that allows you to convert the firing rate from 100 rounds a minute, maybe as fast as you can with your finger, to 400 or 500 rounds a minute. So it's a mechanism that's legal that you can stick on the gun and do that. And a number of these guns had that. That kind of bump stock thing is what the NRA came out yesterday and said, hey, listen, we're going to support measures to outlaw those things. I've opened a bill file yesterday here at the Utah State Legislature to do the same thing. That's an incremental movement in the right direction that I welcome and that I think we should welcome from the NRA. But I do think that what the NRA would like to do is avoid this bigger discussion that Mars referred to. And that is, we need to shift the paradigm about how we think about guns in our society. The real reason that we have so many people killed and that we have almost every day mass incidents of killing like this, incidents of mass killing like this, I need to phrase that correctly, is because the guns are just pervasive in our society. Some people estimate that we have more guns than people in the United States. What are we going to do about that? Because when you have guns that are so widely available, it ensures that you have a regular incidence of people, for whatever reason, domestic violence, many reasons, because they have mental problems or emotional problems. Sometimes they're going to go out and do these things because it's so easy.
One thing that's fascinating to me about the Second Amendment debate, so I'm gonna tap onto what we just said about the First Amendment. First Amendment, we had this discussion and we say, listen, you can exercise all the freedoms found in the Constitution, and yet there's gonna be rules of order like time and place and manner, right? We just had that discussion. Well, the lobbyists for the guns, and I'm not gonna say Second Amendment, because Second Amendment speaks to the people. Our Constitution speaks to the people, the citizens' rights, and yet we've so effectively covered the manufactured item, the gun, the mechanism, and coupled that so closely to the actual freedom that it's intriguing to me. If you ever say, I want to modify a weapon or I want to restrict an weapon, that debate has become, but what about my right? Well, in every other constitutional debate, we have manufacturing, if you will, we have regulations, we have safety, and we don't see that as an infringement on the fundamental right. I think in the United States, we have to separate the manufactured item, the goods and service, from the right itself.
The gun is not the person who holds the right to own the gun.
Right.
Those
the
two
hard
things are
part
different.
with guns in the U.S. political debate is it holds a unique place. The New York Times just put out a story yesterday using poll data from the last election. No single characteristic determined your vote more than whether you owned a gun. If you owned a gun, you were more likely to vote for Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton, more than any other characteristic they could come up with to poll. And so what we're talking about is two different Americas having two different broad conversations about guns. There's the safety conversation on the left and the gun violence conversation on the left. On the right, there's still a feeling that we have this right to own guns because we need to protect ourselves against our own government, and that fundamental belief is really hard to shake. And when you're saying, well, why can't I have as many guns as I want? Because if it comes to the time where we need to have another revolution in this country, I might need more than one. And to change that conversation will be incredibly difficult. And groups like the NRA have been so successful in that message that I don't know if there is a more intractable debate in America than that.
Here's to illustrate Matt's point and take it a step further. one of the things that you hear folks who really are advocates for guns in the Second Amendment say, God-given right to a gun, right? So they've moved it beyond, this is my freedom under the First Amendment, or the Second Amendment rather. They've talked about the relationship in a more spiritual context. And we ought to do that more, to go back to Mara's comment about the First and Second Amendment. We all have a God-given right to hold our own opinion and to speak that opinion. We don't talk about it in those terms very often, however. And it's a marketing, a messaging success of the NRA that they have now said God-given right in connection with guns and not with other stuff.
So if we do have that perspective, and the idea that you own a gun is one of the single most important measures of who you're going to vote for, in Utah, how do our politicians kind of bring those two things together? How do they do that?
Well, I'll tell you how I've done it in the past. I've run a couple of bills that dealt with guns and that were very successful. We had in 2016, the legislature passed a bill to allocate money and do a suicide study. We're dealing with folks at the Department of the School of Public Health back at Harvard in connection with that. Last year, we restricted the access of people who've been convicted of domestic violence to guns. I did both those bills, and I did them working with folks across the aisle. I did them working with people who were zealously advocating for the Second Amendment and for guns, and we found common ground. You do it in the same way you find other solutions, which is go to your people who you don't think are going to be your natural allies and figure out what your common ground is.
There's always areas of political consensus if the policymaker is willing to find them.
Yep.
Okay.
On the state
last comment.
On the state level, it's different than it is on the federal level. I covered federal politics. I once interviewed Chris Stewart before he took office, and he said he would be okay with limiting the number of bullets you could fire at a time. He got so much feedback so quickly, he changed his policy almost immediately.
Right.
So that's going to have to be the last word on this. Thank you for your insights tonight. That's it for tonight's show. Our conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you for joining us. Good night.